Hello everyone, my name is Josiah Willis and I'm a real estate agent with Caliber Real Estate here in Bellevue. I'm in my Bellevue office with Claudia Ollestad from Chicago Title. A little shout out, Claudia.
Hello.
So today we're going to be talking about title on Ask the Experts. This is an Ask the Experts video here, and we're going to be talking about real estate title and why it's important to you if you're a buyer and seller looking at doing a transaction. And we're going to be discussing some of the pitfalls that some buyers and sellers make as they go through a transaction as it relates to real estate title. So you're going to want to stick around to the end because we're going to be sharing an actual case study of a time where things went wrong for a transaction. So a little bit about myself. Like I said, I'm a real estate agent, but I help investors and regular clientele buy and sell houses. So I'm actually, what's kind of funny is I'm actually in the middle of a transaction with Claudia's company, Chicago Title. They're the title company we're using, and Escrow. But right now we're looking at helping a buyer or a builder and a seller actually sell a lot of potentially 80 lot development, and they're going to be helping us through that process. They're one of the largest title insurer in the nation, and she'll talk more about that. But they basically have all the connections and they know what they're doing in terms of title. So all that to say, they handle the bulk of transactions throughout the entire country. So I'm very honored and pleased to have her here because she's going to be sharing some great facts with you that you guys should know. So like I said, in the next 30 minutes, you're going to learn a lot of the issues that arise in title, what to look for in title that could save your butt in a transaction, and then also avoid a lot of cost and liability through this. So stick to the end because we're going to be sharing that case study like I mentioned. So basically, we're going to get started with her talking a little bit about herself. And Claudia, why don't you give our audience a little bit of information about you and your background and the company.
Okay. So I have been with Chicago Title for 18 years. And like Josiah mentioned, I work for the largest title insurer in the nation. Also, just here in King County, I've worked for a couple of builders. I've done some raw land lending, so for the builders. So I have a really broad reach or knowledge base. So from the lending side to the actual builder side, marketing, and then now with Chicago Title for 18 years.
Nice. That's awesome. Very extensive background.
Yeah. Right.
So we're going to just dive right in and get started with some of the questions. So the first question, Claudia, can you just kind of take us through what title is and what a title officer does?
Sure. So we are taking a look at the public records. It's a title insurance search. So we're searching the public records to see who owns the property. And we also want to know, does the property have any legal access? If it doesn't, that'd have a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. We also want to know, are there any encumbrances that affect that title? Because things like liens and sometimes even say utilities have access to your property.
Sure.
And we want to know about who has access to the property.
Right.
So liens, easements, CC&Rs, those are important. You want to know what the rules of the neighborhood are.
Right.
Maybe you're not allowed to have a chicken coop and you want one.
Right.
So yeah. And is the property marketable? That chicken coop one is actually not a bad example. It's not marketable to me if I want to buy a property where I want chickens,
right,
and it says that I can't.
Right.
Or if I want to buy the property and there is a driveway easement that goes right where I want to build on, do an addition. So that would make it not marketable for me.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about what an easement is and what an encumbrance is later on. For those of you who might be a little confused about that, but these are very important terms that you'll need to know. So that's great feedback. Okay, perfect. So we'll go on to question number 2 now.
Yeah.
Can you explain to our viewers the difference between title and escrow?
Yeah, they are really very different. They're under the same umbrella in the name Chicago Title, but they have 2 different functions. So escrow is a non-biased third party in a fiduciary capacity for all the money and documents required to complete the transaction. So they're making sure that the title is clear of liens and that the ownership is transferred correctly. And they're also they take a look at that title report and say, we need to get rid of this. We need to pay off that deed of trust.
Sure.
We need to oh, there's a DSHS lien on there. We need to get that paid. They retrieve payoffs from the lender who the seller has a loan with. They got to get those payoffs. They process the new loan packages for the buyers.
Right.
The escrow delivers the closing disclosure that's required under the CFPB. That's the federal entity that is governing it. So there's so many laws that we have to follow.
Sure.
And they present the documents at the signing. When you go sign your papers, that big stack,
Yeah.
escrow has assembled all of that. And then they prepare the final settlement statement. They disperse the funds to the seller.
Right.
And they get the deed recorded. So now the new people own it. And then they pay off the existing encumbrances, and that's escrow.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, in summarization, it's important for title to order the title report that shows what's on title in the different liens or encumbrances or deed of trust or mortgages that might be attached to the specific property, and then escrow handles the actual transaction along with the real estate agent, either the listing agent or the buyer's agent. So it's basically escrow and the listing and buyer's agent's responsibility to actually look through what comes back on title to then help out taking things off title that need to be done.
Yeah, and that's great. And you do a good job of ordering your title right when you get a listing. Right. And you want to do that to make sure there aren't bigger problems. Sometimes people don't know that there's different things, or they don't realize that when their mother passed away that the mother put the brother in title.
Right.
They don't. So most of the time people aren't unethical or nasty, although we run into that.
Sure.
Most of the time it's really just people not knowing.
Right.
So you get that information up front. You order it as soon as you get the listing.
Right.
And then you take a look at it, and with your seller, the seller should take a look at it and say yes, no.
Right.
And then escrow, they handle it from the point where there is a purchase and sale agreement.
Right. That's their instruction manual, essentially, correct?
Perfect.
Yeah.
So once there's a purchase and sale agreement, they follow those rules that are set by the purchase and sale agreement.
Right.
So escrow isn't involved until there is a purchase and sale agreement.
Okay. And another thing to add on to that, guys, is like the importance of scrubbing title is really left up to partly escrow, but obviously your agent. So it's really important. And oftentimes when an agent writes up a contract for their buyer, they can put in a title contingency, which means if something comes back on title that your buyer might not like maybe they have to give a portion of their property to be used by a neighbor to have the neighbor access their property or whatever, and that's something that the buyer doesn't like. Having a title contingency in a PSA, which is a purchase and sale agreement, allows for that buyer to back out without losing their earnest money if they don't like what they find. So a good real estate agent will write up a contract that best serves their client's needs.
Correct. Yeah.
And so those are questions that need to come up, and then title needs to be scrubbed. So in that circumstance. All right, so that kind of summarizes question number 2. Now we'll move on to question number 3.
Okay.
Can you share with us a little bit about the differences between title and a deed in terms of ownership?
So, sure. So the real estate title is not like a car title. There's not a document called a title where real estate's related, unless you're talking about a mobile home.
Sure.
And then that's like a car title.
Right.
So when a car loan is paid, you receive the title to the car. But on a real estate transaction, when you have the loan payoff, it'll result in the release of the lien, which is called a reconveyance. Mm. And the reconveyance gets recorded, and then the deed is just evidence that the title was transferred to you as the buyer.
Right. So basically, what they use, I think, the terms used are grantor and grantee, right, for passing along a deed.
Right. The deed is proof that the title is being conveyed.
Okay. Okay, so title is basically ownership, but the deed is
the
evidence that title was conveyed.
Correct.
From grantor to grantee is how you would actually say it.
Yes.
Right? So from seller to buyer.
Yes, but to say you own the house, there's a reconveyance of that lien, which the lien is the loan with the bank, if you have one.
If you have one.
Yeah.
Right, unless it's paid off.
Uh-huh.
So then this kind of begs another question, and this isn't actually on the slide, but what's the difference between preliminary title and final title, essentially?
Okay, yeah. So the preliminary title report is everything of record when you order the title. Remember what we
Right.
said when you get the listing?
Right.
And then at the end, you actually get a title policy, and that is what is insured.
Set in stone.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay.
And then things can happen in between. Like you take the listing,
Right.
then somebody could get some kind of lien, say a mechanic's lien. Somebody did some work, they didn't get paid.
Right.
So we're checking until it closes.
Got it.
To make sure that there hasn't been some change in the public record.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes things can be removed, like you said, during the middle of the transaction. Which then at the very end, once it settles, is what the final title policy is.
That's the policy.
Okay.
Correct.
Got it. So for those of you who don't know what a mechanic's lien is, basically it's when maybe, for instance, like she said, a contractor didn't get paid for the work he did on a house for the seller, and he can say, well, I need payment, and so I'm going to file a lien, which is a financial
It's a big deal,
claim,
actually.
basically that's attached to the title of that property, and he basically demands payment if anything is to sell. If that property is to sell, he deserves payment from it, basically. And there's a lot of legal processes associated with that, but in this case, that's what a mechanic's lien is, just FYI. So,
yeah.
All right, I think that sums up that pretty well. So we'll go on to the next question. All right, so for question 4, what are some of the most common questions you get from buyers and sellers, and then also from real estate agents as it relates to title?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's so many different things that come up.
Sure.
It's such a weird thing. Every transaction's different.
Right.
That's a thing to be aware of. But the most common question I hear from agent or broker is, are there any red flags? And we look for problems that need to be cleared before the deal closes. And we don't consider, for instance, the CC&Rs a red flag.
Right.
But that's a thing that's really...
Can be a huge red flag for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge one. You have to look at the CC&Rs. You have to make sure that that's going to work for you, that you can't have a boat in this neighborhood
Right.
visible. You can't paint your house purple,
Right.
whatever the things are. But a big misunderstanding is they'll say, why didn't you tell us about this? And our answer is, we did. It's in the CC&Rs.
Right.
It's there.
Which really means that the agent didn't do their job, because they're supposed to look through the title report, see what the CC&Rs say, and then relay that back to their client.
If you're doing your job and know that they want to have a purple house,
right.
If that's important to them, and this kind of stuff happens.
Right. Oh, absolutely. That's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things I want to let you guys be aware of is CC&R stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And oftentimes those are actually set on title from the developer who originally develops that piece of property, essentially. So if you have a large subdivision and a developer developed that piece of property, oftentimes they'll put CC&Rs on the property to maintain value or establish an HOA or to keep people from painting their house purple or pink or whatever when other people in the community wouldn't want to look at that and it might hurt value. And there's conditions and restrictions that are very specific and very odd, like you would never even think about. So it's basically whatever the developer wants to place on that property could be on title for that. So it's important that a real estate agent looks at that and understands what they're looking for and relaying that to their client. So
what's kind of interesting is on some really old stuff. I don't know if this is what you want to hear or not, but on really old neighborhoods, even in Seattle and around here, there are things that talk about sex and race, and there are old time things, and people will say, we can't have that on there, you have to take it off. Well, we can't take it off, it's part of the record.
Right.
But it's fascinating to see.
It's not enforceable because of the
laws.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. The laws override that, but it can't be removed from the record.
That's funny. So it has to be original record.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's crazy. Yeah, it's CC&Rs are very important to look at. So.
And then some other problems that people run into, really, especially for brokers, and this is a mistake brokers make a lot. So it matters to have a broker who understands contracts and understands what they're doing. Right. A main thing that they need to do is make sure that the seller that they're talking to is who's on the title.
Right.
So they'll be thinking John Smith is selling his property, and they don't take a look at the title report, and it's really John and Mary Smith. Well, where's Mary?
Right.
Well, we can't sell. He thinks he doesn't need to include Mary.
Right.
They divorced. whatever. It could
Right.
be any number of reasons, right? And again, most of the time, not bad, not mean-spirited,
Right.
but you got to make sure that you're dealing with the
person who actually
legal
owns.
person. Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
And then there's also things around like, because Washington State's a community property state,
Yeah.
having somebody else on title, who might be married to, but maybe the person entered in, or maybe the wife owned property before she got married, but now the husband's on title. It's like there's a lot of different things, moving parts that you have to be aware of.
Yeah.
But
and we have homestead rights, and we have
right,
like
right, absolutely.
yeah.
And one thing that goes back to CC&Rs, I remember listening to a developer. It's actually Mike Appleby.
Oh, okay.
And he's in our office. So he was talking about Shoreline, the city of Shoreline. There's a lot of limitations in terms of developers / builders coming in and developing property for like townhomes and stuff like that, because there were old CC&Rs originally on title for certain properties in Shoreline that limit the building height, even though the zoning might allow for building height to be a certain height. CC&Rs may block that because the original developer in 1920 or whatever year it was recorded CC&Rs on that prohibit that build height. So the only way to get around that is for everyone in the community in that subdivision basically to agree to take those off of title, which is how you're going to get a bunch of people to agree on the same thing, in that circumstance. But that's just one example of something that could go wrong if you're not paying attention. But that kind of answers that question. We'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
So number 5. Okay, so moving on to question 5. So what sort of things can be found on title that can actually keep a deal from closing?
Oh, that's a good one. So that's going to be anything that involves a judge. So probates, divorce, bankruptcies, foreclosure proceedings, numerous identity issues. It's really too many
To count.
too many to list. But this is the reason that you get title insurance.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about what title insurance is and how it works. So we'll get into that. But let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
Question 6. Can you explain the differences between an encumbrance and a lien, and what types of encumbrances are there?
Yeah. So actually, lien could be considered an encumbrance,
but not
yeah.
all encumbrances are liens.
Correct.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, you're so good.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Appreciate that.
So a lien might be considered an encumbrance because it affects title until it's paid off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like a financial claim on that piece of property, right?
And for a lien.
For a lien.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. But some other encumbrances are easements for utilities. So like your Comcast or cable
Right.
can have.
Or power even, PSC or whatever.
Exactly. That's right. The CC&Rs, which we've talked about.
Yep, that limit the use of the property.
So the covenant, agreements with the neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah. And then there are restrictions for residential only. So for instance, it might be like no chickens.
Right.
That'd be one. So agreements like road maintenance agreements. Other encumbrances would be like the deed of trust that the seller has.
Right.
They need to pay off their.
The mortgage.
Mm-hmm. And then liens against individuals. So again, that can happen for tax things. It can happen for DSHS, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
so sometimes people can have liens against individuals that get attached to the property.
Right, like maybe a divorce settlement. Someone owes some
Yeah,
money.
and also like the DSHS. That's a big one with child support and things.
Right.
That's one that can be attached to property.
Right. Right.
So.
And actually, this brings up a good point. So liens can also, there's a priority of liens that need to get paid off in the event of like a foreclosure or settling of an estate or anything like that. Certain liens actually take higher priority than other liens.
Right.
And property taxes, correct me if I'm wrong, but property taxes are the number one.
Oh, you don't get out of paying taxes.
Right. Yeah. Government, Uncle Sam's going to get his money one way or another. So yeah, it's really important that.
And that goes to that marketability thing. Let's
Right.
say you have a house where they only have $100,000 of equity, but they owe $125,000 in back taxes.
Right.
Now there isn't maybe enough money to cover it.
Right.
So you need to know that,
Absolutely.
what you're dealing with.
Yeah, because the government's got to get paid. So.
Yeah, exactly.
But all you need to know at this point is that, yeah, there is a priority in liens. So taxes and IRS get paid first, and then something like the mortgage gets paid second in the case of like a foreclosure or something like that. So But yeah, encumbrances, a lien is an encumbrance, but not all encumbrances are liens, like we mentioned. There's even, an encumbrance can even be your neighbor built the roof line over the property line, and that can be considered an encumbrance because it's actually intruding on your air rights space, like something as simple as that. So let's just keep that in mind. But that's probably a pretty good definition for our viewers. I think we'll move on to the next. All right, moving on. So question 7, let's discuss title insurance and then how it works and who pays for it.
Oh, people do want to know that, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, so title insurance is the risk elimination, and we're trying to identify the matters that affect the title so that you know what you're buying. And
there's different types of title coverage, right? Or title insurance coverage.
yes, so you just want to stick with what's on your purchase and sale agreement. That default one is going to give
That's what I've heard.
more coverage. Yeah. So, but you want to know what liens need to be cleared at closing, and so that was back to that first part. And then who pays for it? The seller in this state. The seller pays for the title insurance for the buyer.
Got it.
In Washington State. And by the way, when I'm saying that DSHS, I don't know what that's called in other places. I was referring to Washington State.
Okay.
There too. Yeah. Sorry.
Sure. No worries.
Maybe that's why you were like.
Yeah, that's clear now.
Okay, so.
So standard coverage and default coverage are like two different things, right?
Yeah, so the default coverage has more coverages. It costs about 10% more, but any more on our contracts here in Washington State, the default coverage is the homeowner's policy.
Okay.
And there is a standard coverage. We had it forever. And then maybe 15 years ago or so, it became the norm to use
homeowner's policy. Okay.
And I can't see a reason in the world why somebody wouldn't do it. It's about 10% more, but it has considerably more coverage.
Okay.
And, we're talking, it depends on the value of the home, but it's minimal.
Okay.
And for so much more.
So, and if that's something the seller pays, then the buyer's like, I want as much coverage as possible, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah, not many buyers would say, okay, I'll take the lesser policy.
Right.
And then the buyer pays for their own lender's policy. It's a much smaller
amount. For the mortgage.
But that's who pays for it.
Okay. And then is there, off the top of your head, is there anything that that is covered, or anything that's not covered that might come up on title in the future underneath the extended or homeowner's policy?
Oh, yeah, extended is something altogether different. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about that. So.
Yeah, so, well, with the extended policy, you would see that typically more, that's going to involve a survey.
Okay.
And you'd see that more like on waterfront, kind of more where it's really particular about those lines and things like that. We don't really run into it or use it that much anymore. And in fact, a lot of property would still, even in the old days that we use the extended policy, would benefit from the homeowner's policy and just getting a survey on the side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to find out which is more financially makes more sense for you. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that explains things.
Okay.
I think we'll go on to the next question.
Okay.
So what are sort of the most often overlooked things on title that people miss that are important? We kind of already talked about this, I think around CC&Rs maybe.
Yeah, and like I said, the thing about just making sure you know who you're dealing with. That's a really important one. It seems kind of goofy, but it's true. And also, if you know you're buying that house and you want to do an add-on, you want to make sure that the property line goes the right way, that there isn't an easement there. That's you have to know how you're going to use your property and take a look at the report to make sure that it agrees.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that I can think of is easements. Besides CC&Rs, are easements. Like someone has an opportunity to use a portion of your property by law because they have a claim on that to use it. Maybe like public access, or like she said, utilities. The utility company can come out on your property and do what they need to do with the utilities that they own. But there's sewer, power, Comcast, for instance, different utilities like that. So there's just different things that if you have power lines on your land, they have the right to access those. And in fact, my dad actually has power lines on a portion of his property he owns, and he can't have any trees a certain distance away.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, they'll just come and mow them down, and he has no say over it. So.
Oh, I had an interesting thing personally with that.
Really?
So I actually bought a house that had has overhead
Power lines.
Power lines.
Yeah.
And they were very specific about, and it was on a slope. So it needed to make sure that it wouldn't, what is it called when, so that it wouldn't erode.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Erosion.
So we had to put in some measures, and in this case, the best thing was grass.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like the root system kind
Yeah,
of thing?
to make sure. And the energy company was happy with that, but the homeowner association wasn't.
Really?
Yeah, so
Interesting.
do you see why it's important to know
Absolutely.
these things? And
Yeah.
so we went to the expense of putting in the grass for the erosion control measures, and then the HOA said you can't have them there. So then you know what happened to us?
No, what happened?
It was a drag. The erosion control absolutely had to stay, so the homeowners association wouldn't allow us to maintain the grass.
Are you serious?
So it just had to be.
Gosh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's make it even let it look worse.
But it's a really good example of that it matters to take a look and see what is that? What are the rules around that? You know?
Right. And yeah. Again, that's another reason why easements and covenants and restrictions are important to know. So, awesome. Well, we'll move on to the next question.
Okay.
Can you explain sort of the different sections of a title report?
Sure. Okay, so the first page is really just going to talk about who we're talking about.
Right.
And then you're going to have the financial stuff like the
liens and loans.
The loans,
stuff like that.
The liens and things come in. Oh, and then we have a Schedule A. That's your legal description.
Got it.
And then we have the Schedule B, which are the exceptions that we've kind of been talking about. Oh, there's an easement. Oh, the utilities get to go here. Oh, there's a tax bill. There's a mechanic's lien.
Right.
And a lot of these things can be cleared off, and it's not a problem, but they have to be dealt with through the escrow process usually.
Right.
So.
Awesome. Yeah, that's, once you get familiar with it, me as a real estate agent, once you get familiar with reading a title report, it becomes a little bit more clear how to sort of navigate it. But from, someone who's never either bought or sold before in the past, looking at one can be a little bit overwhelming, but it's not that complicated once you actually know what you're looking at. So.
But you know what? That's so good that you say that, because really most brokers remain for their
Throughout their career.
For their career intimidated by the title
Yeah.
report. And really what we're selling here, and people seem to forget this, what we're selling is a piece of property. And in this country, it's the biggest, most important thing for people,
Absolutely.
right?
Biggest
spending
investment.
Yes, they're spending their money. And property rights in this country are protected.
Right.
It's actually a really cool thing about being here in this country. Our rights are protected.
Right.
And so the title report, you're selling property, and that report is talking about the property. It is not something to ignore.
Right.
It's a crucial part. It is the part.
Right. Absolutely.
And very few brokers actually really understand that. They're like, oh, that title thing, that looks intimidating and complicated. And really, I'd invite those people just to call me. Call your team.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful that you've taken, the initiative to figure it out and
I appreciate
learn a little
that.
bit more about it. And then you also know that you can lean on your team.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why you're here.
Oh, thanks.
So yeah. So we'll move on. Let's move on to kind of a horror story case study. Essentially, I know this is what you all been waiting for, but maybe you kind of heard a couple along the way, but maybe something where title kept a transaction from closing because someone didn't do one simple thing. Maybe it was the real estate agent or the buyer or seller.
Oh, I got a better one.
Okay.
Share
with us.
I got a better example.
Share with the class.
Okay, I'll share with the class. So fraud is actually a really big deal in our industry.
Besides wire fraud.
Besides wire fraud.
Yeah.
Yep. So your identity is really, highly coveted, right? You got to protect your identity.
Absolutely.
So we actually had a property on Mercer Island that had sold, and the buyer built a beautiful new $4 million house on it. Wow. Yep. And then a few years later, somebody came knocking on their door and said, "What is this house doing on my property?"
Oh, that's a bad one.
Yeah. And the buyer, of course, is like, "What? What do you mean? He's like, yeah, this is my property. This property owner had been in Europe for 10 years.
Wow.
And some bad people discovered that, went to all the trouble to get documentation and proof that they were the owner. And this was a little while ago. Title companies are a lot more cautious about who can notarize documents now because of things like this.
Sure.
It was just notarized at some little notary thing. And it actually was like an international driver's license, I want to say, which is not a form of identification that we would take anymore for sure.
Wow.
And anyway, this is a case where the title insurance had to kick in.
Wow.
Yeah, that is exactly what they were covered for. So the buyer did nothing wrong.
Right.
And they were insured.
Wow.
And the seller, it's still his property, frankly.
Wow.
That's what. Remember when I said you can't? The property is really protected here.
Yeah.
They can't just take it from that guy.
Right.
So then that's where a lawsuit would come in and to figure out how we're going to fix that.
Wow.
And there was a settlement, and everybody got their money. And
I see. So there was a settlement, went to
Yep.
court, and stuff like that. So from a title insurance perspective, what happened?
I don't know. I want to be careful. I don't know if it went to court or if it was just settled.
Oh, out
But
of
it
court or
hadn't-
mediation or whatever.
Yes,
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But sometimes they go to court.
Right.
Sometimes it's mediation. Sometimes it's just settled. But for a big one like that, I mean.
So does that mean, like, how did title insurance get involved? Was it they helped with the buyer or the person who actually owned it?
So the buyer is calling because they have the insurance
Okay.
with our company, and by the way, at that point, the title company had done no things wrong.
Right.
The public record research that they did was right.
Right. It was the fraudulent people who
Yes.
frauded the system.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that's why you want an insurance company, and that's why it matters which company you pick. $4 million.
Yeah.
You want to have a company that's got some money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
expertise.
and expertise. That's exactly right. So it's not like there's tons of those type of stories like that, but you want to be covered when they are.
Absolutely.
Everybody thinks that title insurance is kind of boring until they need it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You want to have a professional in your corner. And that kind of goes without saying, guys. I mean, can't you see like how, and we're going to wrap this up, but can't you see how important it is to have the right professional in your corner? Because, I mean, these are no small decisions, right, when you're talking about one of the biggest assets you'll ever buy or sell. But it's also, I mean, we could spend, hours talking about this subject and not even cover it all. So it's important that you choose and work with the right professionals and the team that we have in place. Like I said, I like to use them for title and escrow because they're such a large company and they have not only deep pockets for issues like the $4 million Mercer Island house that they had to help with insurance, but also they're doing such high volume transactions that they've pretty much seen it all, right? Whether it be land development and entitlement process or single family home sales, like they do it all. And that's why I brought Claudia along to interview because, like I said, they're probably the foremost expert in this.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, in my office here in Bellevue, just in Bellevue, we have 4 title officers with 100 years combined experience.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's pretty cool because sometimes I'll be listening to them and they'll say, "Oh, I remember that property." They already knew about the issue on that.
Right.
Yeah, so.
That's cool. And actually, in fact, no joke, we had Mike Appleby, who's a part of Chicago Title, vice president, and he came in and spoke right before we did this interview to our office, and he was talking about the state of the market. And that kind of brings up a good point is that title companies know what's going on in the market because they're seeing which transactions are closing and being processed, right? So from that perspective, they're a wealth of knowledge and resources for us agents to use, and most agents aren't utilizing them like they should be. Like I said, I have a deal that Mike is helping me out with. That would be a potential 80-lot development in Snohomish County right now.
It's amazing. That's amazing. Congratulations.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so we went mutual on that, and without their expertise, it would be a lot more difficult to get through this and maybe not even have it closed. So it's really important you choose the right professional. So if you're interested in buying or selling, or you're looking for a real estate agent to use, I'd love to be your real estate agent, or at least have that conversation with you. And then you can also benefit from Claudia and her team as part of my team in terms of the title side. So give me a call at 360-560-8073 if you're interested in learning more, and you'll get to work with me and Claudia as a team.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's
so
been
fun.
really educational,
Yeah.
and I hope you guys learned something. So, yeah, reach out, give us a call, or we look forward to working with you, hopefully. So, thanks
Yeah.
again, Claudia.
Thank you.